My boss laughed at my 5-year plan. I executed it in 3. I want to take you to a Tuesday afternoon in October. Not 3 years ago, not the Tuesday when everything hurt. The other one. The Tuesday I walked into a conference room in downtown Chicago in a suit cost more than my first month's rent at that apartment I used to cry in. I sat across a table from investors, real ones, with real money, and I pitched my company. A company I had built from a blank Google Doc and a burning feeling I still can't fully describe. And when I was done, when they looked at each other and nodded, when one of them slid a term sheet across the table with a number that made my hands shake, I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I just sat in my car in the parking garage for about 11 minutes. And I thought about a different room, a different table, a different Tuesday. The one where my boss, a man I had respected for 4 years, a man I had stayed late for, covered for, made look good in front of his bosses, the one where that man leaned back in his chair, looked at the 5-year plan I had spent 3 weeks writing, and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an interesting idea laugh, a real one. The kind that comes from the stomach, the kind that says, I am not even going to pretend this is possible. He slid the plan back across the table without reading past page 2 and said, "You're a good worker, Jordan. Let's keep it that way." I didn't scream that day either. I didn't fight back. I didn't quit dramatically. I didn't even cry until I got to the bathroom. I just became someone he never expected. And that is what this story is about. Intro. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Either way, I'm really glad you're here. This channel exists for one reason: to tell the truth about what becoming looks like. Not the highlight reel, not the transformation montage, the actual thing. The dark mornings, the quiet decisions, the long stretch of time between who you were and who you are becoming. This story isn't about revenge. Let me say that again, clearly, so it lands. This is not a revenge story. It's about becoming. It's about what happens when someone hands you the most humiliating moment of your professional life, and instead of letting it break you, you use it as the first brick in something they could never have imagined. If you are new here, subscribe before we go any further. Turn on notifications, because if this story finds you at the right time, and I believe it will, you are going to want to be here for everything that comes next. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Act 1. The lowest point. Music cue. Melancholic hope. Understated. Intimate. I grew up in a house where ambition was treated like a personality flaw. Not in a cruel way. My parents weren't villains. They were just people who had been hurt by wanting too much, and they had decided the safest thing to do, the kind thing, the loving thing, was to protect me from that same kind of hurt. So when I said I wanted to be an entrepreneur, the response was not, "Let's figure out how." The response was a long pause and, "Jordan, you need a stable job. You need benefits. You need a backup plan." I heard that sentence so many times, it became its own kind of soundtrack to my 20s. You need a backup plan. You need a backup plan. You need a backup plan. So I got one. I got a job at a mid-size marketing firm, the kind of place that has a ping pong table but no real path for advancement, where everyone is friendly until a promotion is on the line. I started as a junior account coordinator at 23, and I told myself it was temporary, a launching pad, just until I figured out the next thing. That was 4 years before the laugh. Here is what I need you to understand about those 4 years, because I think it's important to be honest about this. I wasn't miserable the entire time. Parts of it were genuinely good. I liked some of my colleagues. I got decent at my job. I made a livable salary. I had an apartment with a kitchen I liked cooking in and a commute I didn't hate. But there was this other thing, this quiet, persistent thing that lived somewhere in my chest and wouldn't leave. It showed up most on Sunday nights, that particular brand of Sunday dread that isn't just about Mondays, it's about the gap between who you are and who you know you're supposed to be. I would lie there in bed and think, is this it? Is this just what life is? And then I would tell myself to stop being dramatic. Millions of people would love this life. Who was I to be dissatisfied? That is a very effective way to keep yourself small, by the way, to be ashamed of your own ambition. I learned that later, but at the time, I just kept pressing it down. By year 3 at the firm, I had been promoted once to account manager, and I had quietly started writing things down, ideas, observations, problems I noticed in the industry that nobody seemed to be solving. I had a notebook I kept in my desk drawer, and I'd write in it during lunch breaks and late evenings when my boss thought I was finishing reports. It wasn't a business plan yet. It was more like a map of everything that frustrated me, which I've learned since is actually exactly where a business plan starts. The idea I kept coming back to was this. There was a massive gap in how mid-sized brands handled their digital content strategy. They were paying agency rates for cookie-cutter work. The agencies were over-promising and under-delivering, and the in-house teams were overwhelmed and under-trained. Nobody was building a lean, specialized operation that could actually sit inside a brand's ecosystem and produce content that converted. I thought I could build that. I spent 3 weeks on a formal document. I called it a 5-year plan, but it was really a business case. I outlined the market gap, I included research, I had projected revenue models, modest ones, but real. Phase 1, freelance to generate capital. Phase 2, build a small team. Phase 3, incorporate and pitch for retainer clients. Phase 4 and 5, scale and specialize. It wasn't perfect, I know that now, but it was real, it was thought through. It was something I was genuinely proud of. And I made a decision that at the time I thought was smart. I decided to share it with my boss. His name was Richard. Let's call him Richard. Richard had been in the industry for 20 years. He had a corner office and a habit of taking credit for other people's ideas in client presentations. I had watched him do it to other people and told myself he respected me differently, that I had earned something with him that the others hadn't. I asked him for a 30-minute meeting. He gave me 20. I presented my plan. I walked him through it page by page. And when I finished, I looked up and I saw his face, and my stomach dropped. He wasn't angry. He wasn't impressed. He was amused. He leaned back in that big leather chair and he laughed, not loudly, just enough. And then he slid the plan back to me, pages 2 through 12 still unread, and he said the thing that I have turned over in my mind probably 10,000 times since. You're a good worker, Jordan. Let's keep it that way. 7 words. Let's keep it that way. As if my value to the world was defined by how useful I could be to him, as if ambition in me was something to be managed, contained, returned to sender. I walked back to my desk, I put the plan in my bag, I opened my laptop and finished a report about Q3 social engagement metrics for a client whose product I had never used and didn't care about. And then I went to the bathroom and cried for about 4 minutes. Not sobbing, just quiet tears, the kind that come when you realize that someone you respected doesn't see you at all. Not really. They see what you do for them, and those are very different things. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think this is the part that a lot of people leave out of their transformation stories. I did not walk out of that bathroom with clarity and fire and a plan. I walked out of that bathroom, went back to my desk, and spent the next 6 weeks feeling like garbage. I questioned everything. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe that plan really was naive. Maybe ambition was a luxury I couldn't afford. maybe the backup plan was the plan. 6 weeks of doubt, 6 weeks of quiet shame, 6 weeks of smiling at Richard in the hallway like nothing had happened, because what was the alternative? That period almost won. I need you to hear that. The doubt almost won. And that's when everything started to change. Act 2. The decision. It didn't start with a dramatic moment. It never does, really. Not in real life. It started with a podcast episode I half listened to on a Tuesday morning commute in December. I wasn't even paying full attention. I was looking out the train window at Chicago in winter. Gray sky, gray slush, everyone looking like they were quietly enduring something. The person being interviewed was talking about what she called the validation trap, the idea that we spend enormous amounts of energy seeking permission from the very people least qualified to grant it, that we go to the people who are most invested in our staying exactly where we are, our bosses, certain family members, anyone whose power depends on our compliance, and we ask them, "Is my dream worth pursuing?" And of course, those people say no. Of course they do. Not always out of malice, sometimes just out of self-interest, sometimes just out of fear, sometimes because they once had a dream that didn't work out and they genuinely believe they are protecting you. But we keep going back, we keep asking, we keep handing our most precious and fragile thing to people who are structurally incapable of valuing it. Pause. I remember sitting up straighter on that train. I remember rewinding that part and listening again. I had handed Richard my most precious thing. I had handed him 3 weeks of my inner life, my observations, my research, my hope, and I had been shocked when he returned it damaged. Why did I do that? Why had I needed his permission? That question cracked something open in me. Not immediately, not all at once, but it started something, a slow shift in the architecture of how I thought about myself and what I was allowed to want. Pause. I made a decision that December, not a loud one, not one I announced to anyone. I made it quietly on a Sunday night, sitting at my kitchen table with my old notebook and a cup of coffee, and what I decided was this. I was going to execute my plan. Not in 5 years. I was going to find a way to do it faster, and I was not going to tell a single person, not Richard, not my colleagues, not even most of my friends, until there was something real to show. The silence was deliberate. I had learned the hard way that sharing a dream before it has any roots is an invitation for people to step on it, intentionally or not. I was going to grow this thing in private until it was strong enough to survive being seen. Here is what the next 18 months actually looked like. I want to be specific because I think vague inspiration is actually pretty useless. You deserve the real version. Month 1 and 2. I took every spare hour, mornings before work, lunch breaks, evenings, weekends, and I learned. I had identified that my plan needed 3 core skill sets I didn't fully have yet: client acquisition, financial literacy for small businesses, and a deeper technical understanding of content performance analytics. So I built a curriculum for myself. I signed up for 2 online courses, one on small business finance, the kind of fundamentals they don't teach you in a marketing job, one on advanced content analytics. Total cost, about $340. I treated them like a second job. I was in bed by 9 and up by 5:30. I gave up most of my social life for 8 weeks, not forever, just for the season I needed to. Month 3, I landed my first freelance client, a small e-commerce brand run by a woman I knew through a mutual connection. I charged less than I knew I was worth, deliberately. I needed a case study more than I needed the money. I treated that account like it was my biggest client. I over-delivered on every metric. At the end of the first month, she referred me to 2 other business owners. Month 4 through 6, I had 3 freelance clients on evenings and weekends while still working full-time. I was averaging about 4 hours of sleep on weekdays. I am not going to romanticize that. It was brutal. There were weeks I genuinely didn't know if I was making a mistake. There were Saturday mornings when I sat at my desk and thought, I could just stop. I could just be a person who goes to brunch. Nobody would know. But I had started tracking something, a small spreadsheet, client names, hours worked, revenue generated, testimonials. Watching that spreadsheet grow, even slowly, was more motivating than anything else. It was evidence, and evidence is the antidote to doubt. I also want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in transformation stories, the emotional labor of the in-between. Because while I was building this thing on the outside, I was also doing a very different kind of work on the inside. And it was harder, honestly. I had to figure out what to do with the anger, because I was angry. At Richard, yes, but if I'm being honest, also at myself. For the 4 years I had spent hoping someone would see me and promote me and tell me I was ready. For how much of my self-worth I had outsourced to a job that was never going to give me what I actually needed. For the years I had let the backup plan become the only plan. That anger was fuel for a while, but I learned, slowly, through journaling and a few really honest conversations with one good friend who I trusted with the real version of what I was going through, I learned that anger is a terrible long-term energy source. It burns dirty. It burns you. So I had to find something else to run on. What I found was this. I stopped building for revenge and started building for the version of myself I could actually respect, not to prove Richard wrong, to prove myself right. That sounds like a small distinction. It isn't. It changes everything about the choices you make. Revenge building is reactive. It's always in relation to someone else. It always gives them a starring role in your story. Purpose building is generative. It's yours. Month 7, I had a conversation with my friend Tanya, the one person who knew what I was actually doing, and she asked me something I wasn't ready for. When are you going to take the leap? I didn't have a real answer. She said, you keep talking about when the time is right. I just want to ask you, what does right look like? Because I think you might be waiting for a certainty that's never coming. She was correct. I had been using preparation as a form of protection. As long as I was still preparing, I couldn't fail yet. The freelance work was real, but I was treating it like a hobby instead of the beginning of a business. I hadn't incorporated, I hadn't raised my rates, I hadn't stopped thinking of myself as someone with a side hustle. She said, what if you just decided you were already doing this? What would change? Everything changed. Month 8, I incorporated. I named my company. I opened a separate business account. I raised my freelance rates by 60%. I lost one client. I signed 2 better ones. And I started going to work every day at that office, knowing it was temporary. Not with resentment, just with clarity. I did my job well because I'm not someone who does things halfway, and because I needed that paycheck while the business built runway. But I stopped needing Richard's approval. I stopped flinching when he walked by my desk. I stopped caring whether he noticed my work or not. That internal shift, the detachment, that was the most powerful thing that happened in this whole story, more than any external milestone. Because when you stop needing someone's approval, they lose the ability to hurt you, and in a strange way, they also lose the ability to help you. You become genuinely, quietly free. And that's when everything started to change. Act 3, the transformation. Let me tell you what month 12 looked like. I had 7 clients, a mix of e-commerce, a couple of SaaS startups, one regional lifestyle brand. My monthly freelance revenue had crossed $8,000. That wasn't enough to replace my salary yet, but it was enough to be undeniable. It was enough to look at and think, this is real. My day started at 5:15 in the morning. I would spend the first 90 minutes on business work before getting ready for my day job. At lunch, I would check in with clients, answer emails, sometimes take a short call. Evenings were a mix of client work, strategy, and, crucially, rest. I had learned around month 9 that running on empty was making me sloppy in both places, so I started protecting 7 hours of sleep like it was a business asset, because it was. I had also started doing something that felt almost embarrassingly simple, but turned out to be transformative. I read for 30 minutes every morning before I looked at my phone. Biographies mostly, people who had built things, people who had been told no. I wasn't reading for inspiration exactly. I was reading to normalize the timeline, to remind myself that most real buildings take time. Things take longer than you want and more work than you expect. And that's not a bug, it's just reality. Around this time, something interesting started happening at work. I noticed that I was showing up differently. Not dramatically, I wasn't walking around announcing that I was building something, but the internal shift was showing up in small external ways. I was calmer in meetings. I stopped getting rattled when Richard took credit for something I'd done. I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped seeking approval in the 100 micro ways I hadn't even realized I'd been seeking it, and people noticed. Not Richard at first, but colleagues. A few clients of the firm started specifically requesting me on their accounts. One of them, a founder named Marcus, who ran a growing direct-to-consumer brand, pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "You think differently than most people at this agency. How long have you been here?" I told him 4 years. He nodded slowly and said, "Interesting." I filed that away. Month 14. Something shifted in my confidence in a way I still find hard to fully articulate. It wasn't arrogance, I was very aware of how much I still didn't know, but there's a particular kind of confidence that comes from having actually done the thing, not studied the thing, not planned the thing, done it, shown up, delivered, been held accountable, and succeeded often enough to trust your own judgment. I had that now. It was quiet, it didn't need anyone to see it, but it was load-bearing. I remember one specific morning, a team meeting where Richard was presenting a strategy to a client and he got a key data point wrong, badly wrong, and a year earlier I would have stayed quiet, or quietly corrected him in a way that let him save face, because I needed him to like me. Instead, I said calmly, "Actually, the numbers from Q2 show the opposite trend. I can pull that up." And I did, and the client thanked me directly, and Richard looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Not warmth, something more like recalibration. He was trying to figure out who he was dealing with now. Month 15. I landed the client that changed everything. I was at a small industry networking event, something I had previously avoided because I found them exhausting and performative. But I had made a rule for myself, 2 events per month, minimum, because I understood, intellectually, that the business I was building would live or die on relationships, not just skills, relationships. At this particular event, I ended up talking to a woman named Diane, who was the VP of marketing for a mid-size consumer brand I had actually admired for years. We talked for about 40 minutes about content strategy, about the real problems brands face, about what she wished existed in the agency landscape. What she described was almost word for word the gap I had identified in my original 5-year plan. I didn't pitch her that night. I asked good questions, listened carefully, and followed up 2 days later with a brief, specific note about something we'd discussed. A month after that, she brought me in for a conversation. A month after that, she signed a 3-month retainer. It was the largest single contract I had signed. It was the moment the business stopped being something I was building and became something that existed. I want to pause here and talk about something that I think often gets edited out of these stories, the quiet grief of the in-between. Because here's the thing that nobody tells you about transformation. It doesn't always feel triumphant from the inside. Sometimes it just feels like a lot of work. Sometimes you're in month 17 of building something, and you look up and you're tired and you're lonely, and you miss the simplicity of just having a job where you clock out and don't think about it anymore. There were nights during this period when I genuinely asked myself if I had made a mistake. Not because the evidence suggested I had, the evidence was actually pointing the other way, but because transformation is uncomfortable. Because becoming someone new means, in some ways, grieving who you used to be. The person I used to be was easier in some ways. She had lower expectations of herself. She didn't carry the weight of a business on her weekends. She could watch an entire season of something on a Saturday without guilt. I had to learn to let that version of myself go, gently, not harshly, with some gratitude even. She got me here. She did the best she could with what she knew, but she wasn't who I needed to be anymore. Month 18. I had 11 clients, a growing reputation in my niche, and a business bank account that had crossed into 5 figures. I had also, quietly, hired my first contractor, a content strategist I'd met through that industry event circuit, who believed in what I was building enough to take a reduced rate while we got going. I gave my notice at the firm on a Monday morning. I scheduled a meeting with Richard's assistant. I walked into his office with a 2 weeks notice letter that I had written and rewritten about 14 times. Not because I was nervous, exactly, but because I wanted to get the tone exactly right. I didn't want it to be cold. I didn't want it to be warm in a way that felt fake. I just wanted it to be honest, professional, clean. I put the letter on his desk. He read it. And then he looked up at me with an expression I will carry with me for a long time, not because it was cruel, but because of what it revealed. He looked surprised, genuinely, actually surprised, because it had never occurred to him that I would leave. He asked where I was going. I told him I was starting my own company, that I'd been building it for the past 1.5 years, and that I was ready to commit to it full time. He said, "What kind of company?" I told him. There was a pause. 3. Track everything. Evidence is the antidote to doubt. When the dark mornings come, and they will, you need something to look at, a spreadsheet, a log, a single number that has gone from 0 to something. That something will carry you when nothing else can. 4. Detach from the approval of the people who dismissed you, not through anger, through indifference. Real, earned, peaceful indifference. The moment you stop needing their validation is the moment you are truly free. And ironically, it's also often the moment they start noticing you. 5. Run on purpose, not revenge. Every morning ask yourself, who am I becoming today? Not what do I want to prove? Who am I becoming? That question will take you so much further. One last thing. If you are right now where I was, in the bathroom, in the parking lot, in the Sunday night spiral, in the phase where you are carrying something that no one else can see yet, and you are not sure if it is a gift or a delusion, I want you to know those two things are not as different as they feel. Every real thing starts as something no one else believes in. Every version of yourself worth becoming is, at first, a stranger to everyone around you, including sometimes yourself. Keep going. Not for them, for you. What's your glow-up story? Tell me below. I read every single comment, and sometimes those comments become the next story on this channel. If this one found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
I thought about that notebook in my desk drawer at the firm, about those lunch breaks where I'd scribble observations about industry gaps, half convinced I was wasting my time, about the commute home after the laugh with my plan folded up in my bag like evidence of something shameful. The first encounter happened at an industry conference in my city, one of those big ones, the kind that fills a downtown convention center and has multiple keynote stages, and everyone wears lanyards and trades business cards. I had been invited to speak on a panel, not as an attendee, as a speaker, on the topic of content strategy for scaling brands, my exact niche, the thing I had been quietly building expertise in for 3 years. I was backstage getting mic'd up when I heard a familiar voice. Richard. He was there too. His firm had a booth, the way mid-size agencies often do at these things, trying to drum up client interest. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize, doing that thing he always did at industry events, where he held his drink with both hands and laughed slightly too loud. He didn't see me at first. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel satisfaction, the clean kind you read about in stories like this. And there was some of that, but there was also something quieter and more complicated underneath. Something close to compassion, actually. Because looking at Richard in that convention center, in that role he had occupied for 20 years, doing the exact same things he'd always done, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a person who had, for whatever reason, stopped believing that things could be different. And in not believing that for himself, he had tried to loan that limitation to me. I hadn't accepted it, but I wasn't angry at him for offering it.
He spotted me about 20 minutes later. I was coming off stage. The panel had gone well, and a small cluster of people had gathered to ask follow-up questions, the way they do when something resonates. I was handing someone my business card when I heard my name. Jordan? I turned around. He looked, and I don't say this with any cruelty, just accuracy, he looked older than I remembered, and smaller somehow. Not physically, just smaller in the way that people look when the world has gotten bigger around them. "Richard, hey," I smiled, genuinely. "How are you?" He said he was good. The firm was doing well, same as always. He asked how I was, and I could see in his eyes that he already knew part of the answer, that he'd seen my name in the program, maybe, or had heard things through the industry network. "Really well," I said. "The company's been growing fast. We just closed a pretty significant round of investment." There was a pause. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that I can only describe as a man doing rapid and uncomfortable math. "Investment," he said. "So you actually did it?" "I did." Another pause, and then something I hadn't expected. "I didn't think you would. I should have." It was as close to an apology as Richard was capable of, I think, and in that moment I understood something important. I didn't need it. I had built this whole thing without his apology, and I would have been exactly fine continuing to do so. His acknowledgement was nice, it was human, but it wasn't the point. The point was never him. He asked if I was hiring. His firm had lost 2 major accounts recently. He didn't say that directly, but I read between the lines, the way you learn to do after 4 years of watching someone manage perception. I told him I'd keep him in mind, and I meant it. Not because of sentimentality, but because I had learned that the world is small, and burning bridges is almost never worth it. We shook hands. He walked back to his booth. I walked to a dinner with 3 potential clients. And I realized, driving home that night, that I felt nothing dramatic. No euphoria, no lingering resentment, just the clean, simple feeling of someone who had done what they said they would do and now got to keep doing it. The Tuesday in October, the Term Sheet Tuesday, came about 2 months after that conference. My company was 28 months old. We had a team of 7 people. We had 18 active clients. Our annual run rate was just north of $1.4 million. And we had been approached by a growth equity firm who believed in the model we'd built and wanted to help us scale into new markets. I had gone into that meeting prepared, rehearsed, grounded. I knew our numbers better than I knew my own phone number. I knew our story, our competitive differentiation, our long-term vision. And when they slid that term sheet across the table, I thought of that other room, that other document, those 7 words. Let's keep it that way. You know what I felt? Gratitude. Real, genuine, unexpected gratitude. Not toward Richard, though I suppose there's an argument to be made that his dismissal accelerated something in me, but gratitude for the version of me who had written that plan, who had been naive enough to think it was worth writing, who had been devastated enough by the response that something finally cracked open. That girl in the bathroom crying for 4 minutes, she deserved better, but she also made it here. I signed the term sheet.
And then I sat in my car in that parking garage for 11 minutes and just let it be real. Not because of Richard, not to prove anything to anyone, but because there is something sacred about a promise you made to yourself, a quiet, private promise made at a kitchen table on a Sunday night when nobody was watching, and then keeping it. I had kept mine, and that, more than any number on any document, was the thing I was sitting with in that car. That's when I understood that everything had already changed, a long time ago, in a decision nobody else had even noticed. So, what do I want you to take from this? Not revenge. Let me be clear about that one more time. If you build for revenge, the moment the doubter sees your success, you'll feel empty, because your whole purpose was them, and now they've fulfilled their role, and you have nothing left to run toward. Build for yourself. Build for the version of you that is possible. Build in the direction of the person you actually want to be, not as a statement to anyone else, but as a commitment to your own life. The best revenge is living well, but only if you're doing it for yourself. Here are the things that actually worked, not concepts, actionable, specific things. 1. Stop asking for permission from the wrong people. Before you share a dream or a plan with someone, ask yourself, is this person invested in my growth or in my staying exactly where I am? Not maliciously necessarily, but structurally. Be honest with yourself about the answer, and then calibrate how much weight you give their response. 2. Build in private until it has roots. Protect your early work from opinions it isn't strong enough to survive yet. You're not being secretive, you're being strategic. There is a time to share and a time to build. Know which one you're in. 3. Track everything. Evidence is the antidote to doubt. When the dark mornings come, and they will, you need something to look at, a spreadsheet, a log, a single number that has gone from 0 to something. That something will carry you when nothing else can. 4. Detach from the approval of the people who dismissed you, not through anger, through indifference. Real, earned, peaceful indifference. The moment you stop needing their validation is the moment you are truly free. And ironically, it's also often the moment they start noticing you. 5. Run on purpose, not revenge. Every morning ask yourself, who am I becoming today? Not what do I want to prove? Who am I becoming? That question will take you so much further. One last thing. If you are right now where I was, in the bathroom, in the parking lot, in the Sunday night spiral, in the phase where you are carrying something that no one else can see yet, and you are not sure if it is a gift or a delusion, I want you to know those two things are not as different as they feel. Every real thing starts as something no one else believes in. Every version of yourself worth becoming is, at first, a stranger to everyone around you, including sometimes yourself. Keep going. Not for them, for you. What's your glow-up story? Tell me below. I read every single comment, and sometimes those comments become the next story on this channel. If this one found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.